looks good. You can turn it back towards the window a little bit. That looks good. So this morning's Dharma talk from where we're at here at isolating ourselves as everyone is doing these days. We're at my home and Unyo's home in near Bellevue, Michigan. We're out in the countryside. And so title of the Dharma talk is Feeling, which is actually one of the links, the 12 links on the chain of existence, called the 12 Nidanas. Feeling, I think it was yesterday, we talked about at the Traverse City Retreat, talked about contact. So there's contact and there's a feeling. So I want to emphasize the feeling part of this. We can talk about the other links somewhat, but and there's different ways of talking about this. There's different ways that teachers talk about how to work with this. Some say the feeling is there, and then it goes into a desire, and one needs to cut before the desire or cut after the desire, but before the grasping. And I would say setting up any kind of tight protocol is a little bit too controlling and could be, not intentionally, but could be a little bit disrespectful or not clear about the way each person works with their mind in a different way. And I think that needs to be left up to the individual. That's why I no longer teach the traditional Tibetan form of Shine and Laktung, or mindfulness awareness, or shamatha vipassana, however you want to say it. I don't try to get rid of it. I think if that's what you're doing, and that is what you want to do, and that's what your teacher, possibly, if you have a teacher, maybe you should do it that way. So right and wrong kind of gets in the way of what we need to see. Right and wrong is a conclusion, whether it's right, conclusion, or if it's wrong, conclusion, relative truth. We need some of that to navigate our world at all, because it's a physical world based on materialism mainly. But we could, I'm going to dose this respectfully, incense, since it's going right in my nose, and not a good place for the incense to go. It's probably curious what's in there. So feeling, we all know what that is. It's kind of, Trungpa Rinpoche called it high-speed thought. And I think he probably didn't know what it was either. And that seemed to satisfy the questioners. But we're not really sure what that is. It seems to, there's no way that I can know when I'm having a feeling or emotion and I ask you, there's some similarity, but I think it's probably quite unique, combinations and conditions there. And also there's, when I want to say, there's lots of comments coming on. I don't know whether they're questions or not on the screen. So this is the first time we've really worked on this way. So it'll take us a while to maybe understand what form would be appropriate. I invite your questions. I'm happy to spend the rest of the hour or whatever responding to questions. So, but I'll go just a little bit further with this feeling. Have the feeling, we have the contact, and then there's a feeling about it. And the feeling will, just to generalize, will be positive, negative, or neutral. I like that feeling. Or I don't care for that. That's not so good. That shouldn't be happening. Or then there's the kind of the neutral one, where a neutral feeling is like the feeling your feet have as you walk across the room. It's neutral. You feel it, but it may feel good. It may not. But now if you're walking on bunny rabbits, that may be a pretty nice feeling to the bottom of your feet. Of course, it wouldn't work too well for the rabbits. But if you're working on hot coals and it is the extreme, of course, that's going to be the other way around. So maybe those images don't work so well. Excuse me. That being said, that's an area where using just those, the idea of contact or sparsha, and sparsha mudra is the mudra you see the Buddha doing when he's touching the earth, when the daughters of Mara or illusion are challenging his enlightenment, and he says, this earth, this solid, sane earth is my witness. So he didn't say, I'm enlightened because, he just said, this is my witness. So he, what did he do? He, in the relative sense, he related to everything and included everything. So first we have contact, which we may be seeing something, maybe smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. We have the contact. So what I would recommend in your sitting practice to do a little bit of that, not only in post-meditation, but in the practice itself. Notice when thoughts arise, when there's just at that moment when there's a contact, and then see what flowers or develops or shrinks or grows out of the contact, because that's the next, as the traditional teaching goes, the next link on the chain of existence. If we're in any other area, we're pretty swamped by what's going on there. So this is an area of the consciousness where we have a little bit of say-so about it. And that say-so may come in the form of just the way in which you're aware of the texture, quality, intensity, heat of the feeling. You might not know this, you might not think this, you might not even agree with this, but when you feel something, immediately we tend to do something with it. To just feel something and do nothing with it is called appreciation. We actually allow, appreciation means, from this point of view, means to give something the space to be what it is. And the quality that arises in your consciousness may not be positive, negative, or neutral. It's possible to do that. It's possible to look at something, feel something, smell something, look at some food, meet a new person that you've never met before, and take no position. You'll notice probably that the mind tends to immediately look for what? Something else, something else, something else. It doesn't want what's in front of it because that challenges the ego mind, and is ego mind, self-centered mind doesn't feel very secure without having some kind of relative knowledge about, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? How often do we have conversations with people where we say, well, that's good or bad? Is that good? Is that good? We might even ask our friend, our mother, our son, for that matter, is that good? Is that good or bad? Is that good or bad? We immediately want to know this or that, this or that. So it's the very nature of confusion and delusion to want a what? Conclusion, to want to know. So the self-centered mind will go to the next link from contact to feeling to craving or desire, wanting something, wanting more of that, wanting less of that. Interesting thing about that, and this is something you could reflect on a little bit. When you have a feeling, if you do nothing with it, if you take no position on it, you really don't, you know it's a feeling, but you don't know whether you like it or don't like it, or you don't really know until you start to ignore the feeling and opt for what you want about the feeling. This is the way ignorance works. It actually acknowledges a split second. It acknowledges that and then immediately abandons that for something else, which is a conclusion, interpretation, or some kind of propaganda that the ego mind, self-centered mind, is spewing forth. So the recommendation is there is not to have the contact and shut down before the feeling, and not to necessarily have the feeling and shut down before the grasping, or not to have the grasping and shut down before the becoming, but to actually, or the fixation, but to actually watch those areas and see if you can be aware. It's an awareness practice. Be aware of how those are functioning, how those, when one changes into the next one and then goes back to another. You can even return to the contact of something I talk about a little bit. I think I may have yesterday. You can actually use the natural cycle of thinking process, feeling awareness process to circle back around to the contact. So you can go to the original touch, the original touch, and then the feeling will arise again. So there's so many ways to talk about that. There's so many ways of all the people that are observing this or watching this or attending this Dharma talk. Your personal orientation towards your mind is going to be very, very personal. When I say that, I'm not saying personal in the sense of being totally different than others, but quite a bit. The way things build up for each person is different. And this is why I no longer teach, not directly. If somebody practices a shamatha vipassana, I was trained to teach that in 1978, taught it for decades, practiced it myself. Now, if I have someone's permission, I would invite them to practice in a little bit different way based on what I've been looking at for a long time. And on the other hand, and on the same hand, I would still, if somebody really wants to practice shamatha vipassana, I would encourage that, and I can even teach that. So, but shikantaza, which is Japanese for just precisely this. So shikantaza is whatever's happening, that's what you watch. You don't try to create an artificial or temporary or a stand-in meditator who's doing better, who's getting better, who's getting more aware, who's getting, or losing their distraction or losing their confusion or losing. Well, they're very relative. Not that they don't work. They do. On some level, of course they work. And so going back to the individual personality, the reason that I teach in a little bit more open way, aligned with the ancient teaching of that Zen Zen Buddhism calls shikantaza, is it gives a lot more openness to what will arise in the mind, so that whatever is arising in the mind can be modified somewhat by your insight, your prajna. So rather than try to perfect some kind of meditator or some kind of stillness ahead of time, I would say look at the chaos as long as it comes up. Look at the confusion. Look, observe. And then when it is time, if you want to use that word, to begin to settle into what that is, then that will happen out of the karma, the causes and conditions that arise as everything: the color of your hair, the color of your skin, your sexual orientation, on and on. All of it. I'm just saying a couple, because there are countless numbers of things that are rising in anyone's mind stream in anyone's lifetime, and changing constantly, and is constantly being affected by all the other things that are elbowing for some kind of acknowledgement or identity or singularity or place of their own. So there's lots of things on the screen.
Yeah.
You see them. So are there any questions?
Yes. Junju has a question. She said, how does the earth witness?
It's not separate. I don't know if the daughters of Mara, maybe the one on the left, said so. I think her name was Junju. So the earth, it's the idea of not separate. So not separate. So this earth is my witness. This everything is everything. But pointing to the earth would be a very distinct way of saying it. You could even say, I'm my own witness. What is the technical word for that? Is n equals 1? Isn't that what it's called? You're the witness. It's you, as Kobanchino Roshi said, get your own authority. And what is that? There isn't really any authority. There's just an intense, powerful, and including awareness called wisdom. And it doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't belong to you or me or the Buddha. It's something that we awaken to. This is why this is called Buddha Dharma, or awakened truth. Not religion in the conventional sense, but it is a spiritual path that is practiced religiously.
There were a number of people who bowed in to say hello. And Chazam has a question. He says,
Certainly.
we often interpret feelings in terms of what caused them and what to do with them. Do feelings mean anything? How can we work with feelings without additions?
So very good. So I think it's about, I think it's about including them when they come up, rather than start to, if it's if it has a lot of complications to it, rather than try to be too nosy about it. It's just feel, just simply receive the feeling, and have develop an ability to just be with whatever's happening. Whatever's happening, observe. Whatever's happening, if it goes away, observe. If it shows up, if it gets stronger, if it gets warmer, if it gets colder, just observe, observe, observe. And that way we stay in the area, if you use the Nidana, it's called contact. Nothing lasts. Everything is constantly changing, but we tend to solidify it if we want it by grasping and clinging to it or fixating on it. And therefore, it takes on a temporary, I don't know if this works or not, but a feeling of permanence. It takes on a feeling of permanence if you want to get rid of it, because it wants to stay, because there's the nature of of the mind is it has imagination, or the parikalpita, the imaginary nature, is so powerful that if you do anything with paratantra, or the dependently arisen, or that which is just coming because of causes and conditions, it just comes through and lands. But if it has some kind of attachment to it's the right thing, it shouldn't be happening, it shouldn't be coming. I want more of that, or it's not coming in the right way. Then this is an addition that we do when we don't just receive, just the contact, and then the feeling about it. And the feeling may be positive, negative, or neutral. From the point of view of wisdom, those are just, they're not different from each other. They are separated by their texture and by the contrast, like night and day, like warm and cool are separated, but they're the same thing.
Junshu has another question. She asks, does the feeling happen? Does the feeling happen before the expression of it? Does it happen before we actually feel it or recognize it?
Yes. Yes, the feeling. There's the contact, which could be contact with something in the present, in the room you're in. It could be contact with something that has been in deeper levels of consciousness, that's just coming up because of causes and conditions that may be untraceable. It's just coming up, and it's time to relate to that. So it's time for that to come out of its wherever it was in the darkness and come into the light. And so you have contact with that. And then what I'm recommending is to look at the contact and see the way in which the contact engenders, just that contact engenders the feeling. So don't try to stop the feeling, but just observe what it does. If it's a really difficult feeling, just observe. This is why it's called a practice, is because you have to do it a lot. You have to deal with the negativity that possibly you've been hiding out from for 20 years. Now you're on a spiritual path. Now you're going to see this deeply. And it's called mind training. Train your mind.
Chisho in Houston.
Yes.
He asks, isn't the act of noting the bare feeling ignoring something else, meaning the awareness was on something else and it moved to the feeling?
Could be. But at the same time, you're saying that, I'm saying that that's an example of exactly what I'm talking about is what you just said to me came out of your awareness. So people have different experiences like that. Like you say, isn't that this, or isn't that ignoring something else? That's awareness. You may need to do quite a bit of that.
Kian from Kalamazoo has a question. He asks, is contact precise?
Well, it could be. I mean, if you say, it would depend on what it is. It's so varied. I mean, this is precise, but you know, um, a seagull diving in the water after a fish has some precision to it, but the precision might have happened before the actual contact. The first contact might have been seeing that fish, but then going in the water might have been kind of a mess. There's still contact, but it's, am I going for a swim, or is this all about dinner? You can just about tell what the seagull was thinking. So you could look at that, use your own experience. I mean, sometimes it's very complicated. If you go into the mall, which you shouldn't be doing these days, but if you go into the mall and you walk in the door, immediately you might see, dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of people, but those contacts are just all at once, all over the place. And you will notice that as soon as you see someone with red hair, instead of just there, you might go reminded of someone who had hair that color, or you might, or it might trigger looking at someone might trigger emotions that you have not looked at in a few days, few years, few months. So it can be very complicated. All of them, all of the feelings can come up and they can be polarized. And what is important to remember in all of this, as you work with this, if in fact you continue to do this, is don't pick and choose. This is an awareness practice. When you get off the cushion and and just notice how the sitting practice of meditation, which is the training area, how that, to use Keelan's words, that there's a kind of precision that starts to happen. And that precision is there in the midst of maybe very negative feelings, but you're becoming more and more precise about just watching something and not adding on any idea, opinion, conclusion, exclusion. And it's called a path. It's called a spiritual path. It's called a Buddhist path.
Shoto has a question along those lines. He says, yesterday I was swamped by a feeling that was much like hate with no particular story. How do I do nothing with that? It seemed like anything I did after that was a way to modify it.
Mm-hmm. So that is awareness. Because the negative feelings are there, we think something's wrong, but it's not. It's called the path. It is the path. That same situation before you started practicing might have been totally undercover. You might have actually gotten rid of that feeling by lashing out at somebody and thinking that they had it coming. I'm not saying you would. I'm not accusing you of anything. But I'm saying the way you describe it, I would just say, you don't have to do anything, nothing to correct there. But if the self-centered mind, which has not been seen yet, which needs to be seen as unreal, then that still comes in and adds its 2 cents worth to it, which it usually is in the form of, I can't take this anymore, or I don't deserve this, or my spiritual path is wrong, not doing this correctly, because we want something, we want results. This is called what Trungpa Rinpoche in 1972 had a series of talks he put together, and the book is called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which we've been studying. I've been studying for decades and decades. Powerful book. We study it every Tuesday night at the monastery as a group. So trying to get something from something else, trying to squeeze happiness or satisfaction out of samsara. And not easy. It's not that you can't get some pleasure. Nerve endings respond to feelings, and respond to feathers and 50 grit sandpaper. So they respond to the texture of things. Yes.
Chazan has another question. Mm-hmm. He asks, how do we respond to the feelings of others instead of reacting?
So the one that I always talk about, and I'll talk about now, is a way to work with generosity is rather than to do it in the form of giving something so that you get a credential for being so generous, is to give everything your attention. And how do you do that? If you give everything your attention, then you automatically or spontaneously receive whatever's showing up. So if it's negativity, if someone's glaring at you or giving you a hard time or accusing you of something, whether you did it or not, or whether they have a valid reason or not, just receive. And that's so challenging. It's very difficult to do that. But through the sitting practice of meditation, because you're practicing on the very excuse me, basis of what is of your life, which are your thought patterns, your emotions, the 12 links. If you go and study those, and that's something we can talk about more. And every time I touch my nose, I say, somebody's saying, don't touch your face. Probably Ethan, if he's even on there. So it seems to be necessary to take some time out, sit down, hold still, watch the movement. In other words, train your mind. What you're doing is you're reprioritizing your mind, which is constantly thinking and grasping and rejecting passion, aggression, ignorance, passion, aggression, ignorance. And you're sitting down and you're stepping back a quarter of an inch or 10 inches or 3 feet, however you want to look at it. You're stepping back a little bit and you're watching that movement. You're not pushing it. You're not pulling it. You're not doing anything with it. Now, some teachers will say the way to do this is to remove the consciousness from the 3 poisons and train it. In other words, shamatha. Sit down, hold still. When thoughts arise, label thinking, return to the out breath or return to the breath. Or His Holiness the 17th Karmapa has his students doing very tight shamatha. That is, he has them count the breath. And he may be doing something else, but this is one thing he has done is you count. The breath goes out. You say in your mind's ear, 1, comes in, 1, goes out again, 2, comes in again, 2, eyes open slightly. And it's just a way of getting that awareness to actually track something and follow something. I'm not saying that's incorrect. That may be what you need to do. And I have students who come to me when I see them personally. I might actually have them do that kind of training. But most of the people that come to me are ready to do shikantaza. You could say it's advanced. You could say it's the simplest form there is. You could say it's kindergarten. You could say it's graduate school. It just depends on the individual. It depends on the karma that you've been dealing with, not only in this life, but way, as they say conventionally, back there. And is there a back there? Find out. Find out for yourself. Don't believe a word I say. And also, give me the benefit of the doubt. Yeah.
Kozan has a question.
Kozan.
She asks, can we function without the reaction to the feeling informing actions? And if so, how?
You can. And I think it just it takes time. You have to, the feeling of doing that is probably to the ego mind, self-centered mind, the narcissistic mind, which you can't locate. Because if you would locate it, you could find that, you see that it's not real. And you would no longer believe the thoughts that are rising out of that particular masquerade. In the Yogacara tradition is called the 7th consciousness. It's unreal, but it's very difficult to see that. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to see it without a teaching and a teacher and a sangha. That's why we have the 3 jewels. And again, not marketing anything. Live your life. Whoever's listening, live your life however you want to. Live it according to your own understanding. It's just a suggestion.
Shoto has a follow-up question about hate. He said, do I need to relatively activity to give that hate space?
The hate already has some pretty big elbows. It sounds like you just kind of made it into your mind stream. So I wouldn't necessarily do much with it at all. See, you notice when you're in your question, what's behind that question? How do I get rid of this? Or how do I? That's the very nature of samsara, is to think there are separate things, and some things have a right to love and other things don't. There are differences, but the fundamental nature of anything is not separate. So you need to, since you're asking me, you need to witness that hate, those feelings, that the very nature of compassion is there. I'm not saying that that hate and compassion are the same thing. Of course not. But that's energy that is there, that is showing up and is coming from some kind of causes and conditions that you personally have not understood. And I'm not saying you have to go back to the 13th century when you were a monk in Tanambogo and were having a fight with your brother. Though those kind of things show up, those kinds of orientations show up. Are they true? I don't know. Not interested. Truth and falsehood are important in some ways. Sometimes they're extremely important, and other times you really need to look at what the texture of it is. If it shows up, it has a kind of truth to it, but it doesn't mean that it's absolute. It's just a relative structure that was probably caused by the entanglement of the self-centered mind or ego in relative structures called families, jobs, careers, the army, Cub Scouts. All these things are constantly, without a mind training, though, these kinds of things are constantly taking us in the area of conclusions and opinions and ideas and structures in society. And the 8 worldly dharmas, as you probably all know about. More?
Not from him, but from Brad in Indiana.
It's Brad.
He asks, how can I listen deeply to others when I seem flooded by my own?
That's awareness. I'm flooded by my. But to me, as a Dharma teacher, when I hear you ask a question like that, that tells me that you're seeing that. And what I'm saying, again, as a Dharma teacher, I'm saying, do nothing with it. Another way of saying it would be just be with that. That is not. That's where you actually practice compassion, is on your own negativity. You can't really practice it on others. If you do that, then you're just showing off. Look how kind I am. Look how mean they were to me, but how nice I was to them. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying don't work on it so much in post-meditation. It will arise as upaya, or skillful means, when you finally made friends with yourself. Up until that time, upaya as a demonstration of your kindness or your inclusivity or your compassion in the everyday world is probably not going to be too strong. Unless you meet a Dharma teacher, then he, she, or they will be able to see that, because they're not separate from you. That doesn't mean they're reading your thoughts. They're probably not interested in them. But they can see who you are.
Jisho has a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, if awareness is outside of the 5 skandhas, how does it even relate with them? How does it differentiate a feeling from form?
Doesn't need to. The differentiation, the wishing to differentiate, is based on a very subtle, albeit respectful, modality that we call control. And this is something we just don't want to give up control. Even if we'll settle for just, if I can just have the control of a piece of Scotch tape, the stickiness, if I can just have that much stick. I need to stick to some things. So I'm not mocking you. What I'm saying is just look at the very question that you asked. Just look at that. Use that, if you're using the 5 skandhas, just watch what happens there. Nothing lasts, especially if you have no agenda. If you have an agenda, then it appears to last. The lasting could be that you don't get your agenda, or the lasting could be, yes, it's finally happening. I'm getting my way. It's working. My meditation is working. I'm feeling more and more connected with the bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times. And there's all kinds of things or conclusions that can happen. Awakening is not a conclusion. If you think it is, then you'll sit on the side of a mountain and imagine what's on the other side, and maybe even tell people what you're imagining. And you know what? They don't have anything to do, so they'll probably believe you.
Kyun has another question. He asks, does contact create a barrier?
It could function in a barrier kind of way, but that's not the way that is being taught. But you could make a story out of it, that you have contact. For instance, if you walk in a room and you meet someone you've never met before, then the contact with them, because the contact immediately starts to elaborate into ideas, opinions, feelings about that person, positive, negative, neutral, all the nuances in between. So you could say that that is a barrier to what you would have been doing had the person not been in the room. You might have come into the room and worked on your scrapbook, you know, pictures of your favorite kinds of dogs. Or you might have come in, being an artist, you might have come in and done some painting, but instead you came in there, you were going to do that, and then this other person came in. So, and the contact with them, of course, changes. It's very, very complicated. Trying to figure that out is what what materialism is. The world is full of people who are very good at that, and they're very good at using anything they can to control you and control your life. And if you're looking for control, or if you're looking to escape control, then you could be their victim because you're functioning in the same way. But if you see what this is, no one can control you. It's called freedom. They could even threaten your life, and they still couldn't control you because you're not living in the conventional sense of the polarity called life and death.
Susan from Houston has a question.
Yes.
She asks, how do we know it's karma in case we can't be sure about a feeling on the spur of the moment before we act? We just
Don't act. Don't do anything. Don't do anything unless you absolutely have to. It's something I've been saying for a long time. So if you do something you don't have to. But anyway, there's some kind of motivation behind that. And the basic definition of that is impatience. Not willing to just hold your seat, watch what moves. Fundamentally, anything that's happening isn't any of your business anyway. Why? There isn't anybody. Maybe a lot of business going on, but watch the world deal with that. Have you noticed how the world is confused? Some of that confusion is actually there, and some of it you're projecting onto it because it's confusion that you haven't looked at here or possibly here. But more than likely, who knows where it's at. So less is better. Have a willingness to have the feeling that will show up of helplessness or not knowing what to do. It's an incredible, it is actually the path to realization and compassion. Until there's wisdom, you're not going to have, you might have powerful feelings, you might have sympathy, you might see somebody suffering or in pain, and you might have incredible empathy with them. That's not exactly compassion, it's empathy. It's important, but compassion is not an emotion. If you think it is, then okay, then do it that way if you want to. I'm not going to disagree to have an argument or something, but the way I understand it, it might have an emotional resonance if compassion becomes powerful, it will knock you on your ass. As His Holiness the 16th Karmapa in I think it was in Hong Kong many years ago, and stood out on the balcony, maybe in the late 70s, and I have to paraphrase the story, but went out on the balcony and engaged over the city, and was so incredibly moved by the suffering he sensed there. He came back into the room and collapsed, and his attendant monks, he tried to explain to them what it was, but so could be powerful, but it's not exactly an emotion. It's an energetic force that belongs to no one.
Shoto has another question about the hate.
Yes.
Does going to play music and watching how that may relatively soothe the hate, push that hate down for another go around?
You know, that's a good question. It may, but if you're spending a lot of time training your mind, which you are, sit down, hold still, watch what moves. Hold still, watch the movement. Don't add to it. This is how you practice seeing the contact. The thoughts going. Notice when the thought arises. Notice there's a contact point, and then we abandon it for what it's about. And so, if you're going down to play music and have a good time, no, you should do that. You should play music when you want to party or want to play. Do it. The avoiding entertainment, that is kind of In past times, there was ideas of going to the mountaintop and never coming down because the self-centeredness is so powerful. Even Milarepa, the ancient the sage of the Tibetan saint Milarepa, stayed in his cave his whole life. And I don't think it was at the end, towards the end, but initially that was a very self-centered kind of stuff that was happening. He was going to be a great yogi. I didn't know him personally, but kind of looks that way. On the other hand, he eventually transcended, more than likely. If you read his 100,000 songs, which I've read 15 or 20 of them, you can feel it in his writing, even though it's translation, that he had deep understanding of the nature of this world and the world that we're all in. So the idea is to play music, have a good time, but you should be playing Mussorgsky or Mozart, or you should be you should do that rather than playing heavy metal. Or let's mix them together. Really intense expression of anger, which is quite often what I hear in metal, and some of that I like quite a bit, so I appreciate it. Some of it is a powerful artwork, no doubt, but also some of it is just Rage Against the Machine, metalheads.
A question from Shane. He's in Virginia for the pandemic because California is on lockdown. 2 questions.
Yes.
Why do all our questions seem to go back to, how do I get rid of this? And 2, how do those questions help us see the truth?
I think it's just it's important to Buddha Dharma Sangha have someone who, obviously not the Buddha, but someone who is a representation. I do the best I can with what I understand. Just been doing this a while. And then so it's important to ask the question and then receive the answer and then question the answer. And then also listen to what the teaching person says. Go to the wall, sit down. So if you're not training your mind, we can't do this intellectually. You can go quite a ways. I'm sure you've read enough books, as we all have, that where people in the book, they've got it down. They appear to be enlightened. But go have lunch with them. See what it's like. See what your daily experience of looking into this person's eyes. Talk to them about. I probably shouldn't talk about politics, but I'm just saying that there are ways to avoid this that are highly stylized and polished, that are powerful and exemplify incredible intelligence and intellect and understanding relatively. But to transcend this world without leaving it seems to take a lot of mind training. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement, because the very nature of movement is the confusion, is the circularity of the mind called samsara. Starting, ending, starting, ending, starting. Here it comes, there it goes. Here it comes, there it goes. You need to watch that without doing anything with it. So asking questions, good practice. So ask questions, and then whatever the response is especially coming from me, don't necessarily believe it. Chew on it yourself. Look at it. Give it the benefit of the doubt. Say, how does this work? How does this work with my situation, my practice? You might come up with another question that might be a little bit deeper into the way in which you avoid the reality that is your life.
Question from Mayun in France.
Mayun.
She asks, do the feelings that are experienced in dreams or deep consciousness have the same qualities than in the mundane life? Thank you.
Yes. Ma fille arc-en-ciel. Yes, they do. They have, from the fundamental situation, there's no difference between dreams at night or daydreams or this everyday life, walking from the kitchen down the hallway and speculating on whether the garbage has been taken out or whatever is happening, and the dream where those kind of things are happening, or maybe more exotic things are happening. So the differentiation between it's the same consciousness. When I say same, the consciousness is not separate. It separates for a time. It is discrete for a time so that we can train our minds, so we can fundamentally see what this is and who we are. It's an incredible school. It's just, but quite often it's like we have billions of people who are in the schoolroom, and they try to tear it apart, or they try to have their way or make it into something else, and that seems to be necessary to happen. So and also Mayun, there's different people will work with us in different ways. Even though we have 15 people, we all men and women, we all look similar. But being a Dharma teacher for a few years, I've noticed how incredibly different people are. I often say I don't want a lot of students because the way I teach is very direct to each person. When I'm talking to you, well, there isn't anybody else. When I'm talking to there isn't anyone else. When I'm talking to Chezan or Kozan or anybody, if I'm talking to 15, 20 people, or if I'm talking to the people now, there isn't anybody else. So think about what those words say. There isn't anybody else. So that nothing else quality shows up even stronger when I'm sitting looking in someone's eyes. Then because of the training that I've been through with the help of my teachers and the understanding that I have, which is, I'm not saying it's some kind of ultimate understanding. I don't know. I get my permission to function as a teacher from, Mayun, from you, from Chezan, from Unyo, from people that are close to me. And if someone I've never met before comes on and they're listening to me, then kind of giving me some permission. I've had people listen to me for several years before they even contact me. Not sure why that is. Probably they think I'm going to send them a bill or something.
Shoto had a question from earlier about the 12 links. He said, how do we work back through the 12 links?
Well, the traditional way is to go from sickness, aging, and death, as the Buddha did. And then he saw, as the story goes, went outside, saw sickness, aging, and death, and saw why is there old age? Why are people dying? Why is there sickness? And then he went back to what? Well, there's birth. And then, well, why is there birth? And then there's becoming. And then why is there becoming? I mean, I'm just being simplistic about it, but it's that kind of thing. You could do that. There are different ways. There's so many different ways to explain how these work. They're very. There's a way of breaking it down into 3 lifetimes. The middle lifetime is the middle 8 links in the chain of existence. Your past lifetime is ignorance and formations, and your future lifetime is birth. No kidding, birth, and then sickness, aging, and death. So it's just a way of talking about it. They are concepts. The one that is often emphasized, and the one that I would emphasize is look at the way you have the feeling. So something comes up, contact, and then you have a feeling about it, and then you grasp it. When you grasp it, maybe it's a bad feeling, so you grasp it to get rid of it, or it's a really nice feeling, and you grasp it to get more of it, or to have pleasure, or maybe it's something that you're not with, so then you ignore it so it won't distract you. Just a way of talking about it. So it's about watching that, looking at something I've talked about for years. I know you know that, the texture of things. Look at the very texture, because the texture has no positive, negative, neutral personality. You're kind of depersonalizing by being able to just receive. You can't produce onto it, although there are techniques, especially in tantric material, where you're actually going in and actively working with passion, aggression, ignorance in a way, using mantra, using visualizations, and so on. Not against that. I've practiced it quite a bit, but that may show up. But the way that shows up, the way this looks to me, is most of the people I meet need to just sit down and watch what is moving in their mind, and don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away. Difficult to do. Let's start there, and then if you need to practice Tantra, we'll get into that later, maybe.
There aren't any other questions at the moment. One final comment from Shoshi.
Yes.
He says, thank you, Unyo and Sokuzan, and everyone continuing to support this practice. I have no questions for you today, just gratitude and love.
We love you too, Shoshi. Smiling Lion.
we could bow out and dedicate the
Yes.
merit.
However you want to do it. You're in charge.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji ho san chi shi hu chi son bu sa mo ko sa mo ko ja ho ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, the great prajna, paramita. All Buddhas and bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 worlds, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Buddhist community and all that practice in our various places and homes. Please heal and be with everybody who is sick, suffering, and may they all be filled with light.